Great, so welcome to the July webinar for this series. This is going to be a monthly series. We're running it through the end of the year where we highlight different aspects of mushroom production, specialty mushrooms in particular, and hear from guest presenters as well. Our goal here is to really just get the education out there to folks who might be already growing or might be thinking about growing mushrooms as a commercial enterprise. Really anywhere. We're centered in New York State. That's where our cooperative extension program is, but we're one of the few extension programs doing a lot of work with mushroom production, so we're happy to provide support as we can. So welcome everyone to this, whether you're live or tuning in later for the recording. Do want to acknowledge and thank our ongoing partners who are both sort of in the industry, whether they're producing products that we can use to inoculate materials, ready-to-fruit blocks, spawn, mushroom mycelium, all sorts of different things from folks being produced that others that are growing often rely on, just like a vegetable farmer relies on a seed company. We also have a number of nonprofit organizations that are really central partners to this project. Just Food, Grow NYC, Farm School NYC are major partners, along with the Small Farms Program and Harvest New York, which are both cooperative extension entities. So all of us working together, looking at ways to bring mushroom farming to various communities around the region. Our work is certainly centered in New York City and in the Northeast, but again, a lot of our resources and support really can apply across the country, especially because what we're really focusing on with this new project is indoor cultivation. And so with indoor cultivation, we're talking about controlling the climate, and that's something that can happen pretty much anywhere if you're willing to do that. So the webinars will always be on the first Wednesday of the month at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So you can see the dates there if you want to jot those down for future webinars. We do have a sign-up list. If you're not on that list and getting the direct link, then you can find that on our website, cornellmushrooms.org. And I'd encourage you to sign up for that just so you get notifications of both the live presentations as well as the recordings when they're posted. So please join us for these, and if you know folks who might want to present or share an aspect, we've been hearing from some great speakers who are interested in sharing what they've learned, and we'd love to elevate you and bring you into the fold. So do get in touch with us if you have a content or you know someone that might want to share something. I'll just mention our website is really a hub, a central place for mushroom resources, fact sheets, videos, information about identification for the mushroom species that we encourage folks to try growing. Also some information about suppliers, both for things like logs, if you're getting into log production. So we have a map there that links you with folks who are interested in selling logs to potential growers. We also have a supplier list for spawn and mycelium and other kind of associated tools and things. So there's a supplier directory on our website. Our website's going through a overhaul during the summer, so at some point it'll look very different and hopefully be much more organized and easy to navigate. But that is coming down the pike sometime, probably in August or September. Just to be clear from the outset, we define, actually the USDA defines specialty mushrooms essentially as anything that is not Agaricus bisporus. Agaricus bisporus is one species of mushroom. You might know it in different forms and with different common names. So the button mushroom, the cremini, and the portobello are all one species, and it's really just about when they're harvested, what kind of strains and subspecies are used. But that is considered the kind of primary mushroom industry in the US. Most of those mushrooms are grown in southeastern Pennsylvania, as well as in California, and so those are considered the core of the mushroom industry. We focus on specialty mushroom production, so that's everything else. And the reason we do that is because there's great opportunities for growers, both in rural and urban areas and everywhere in between, to work with these different species and capture good value in the marketplace. So USDA just defines them as specialty mushrooms, and so we're using that just to be on the same page as well. So our project is really multi-faceted. We're doing a number of sort of research trials looking at prototyping different units and different scales that can be used to produce mushrooms successfully. We also have in the past done a lot of research with outdoor log production, and you'll find a lot of the results of that research currently on the website. So the indoor stuff is a bit of a new venture for us, and so there'll be more and more content being added to our website, but we're actively curating that. So if you go to the website and don't see a lot on that, that's why. And we also do hands-on classes and opportunities for online learning as well. So you can find out about those things at cornellmushroom.org. But we like to think of ourselves as doing both the kind of research work as well as the extension and education work out in the field. Just to mention to folks too, the two primary species that we see growers really starting with, if you're thinking about a commercial enterprise, we really recommend you start small and you scale that up over time to meet whatever farm or enterprise goals you have. Most commonly indoor, that looks like growing oysters. And oysters can be grown on a wide range of materials and in a wide range of containers, so to speak. Commonly are in plastic bags or tubes, but also folks are experimenting with things like buckets. Oysters really grow well on straw as well as on supplemented sawdust. And so there's a lot of opportunity to start with that one. It's one of the easier ones. And as you then get more familiar, you can branch out into some of the harder mushrooms like these, like lion's mane, king oysters, chestnut mushrooms, things like this that are showing up more and more as growers are experimenting and learning the different types of environmental conditions that are needed. And so for indoor production, often folks start with oyster and then they branch out to other species as they learn and build skills and as they expand their markets. I want to just emphasize, as growers, what we do are the following things. So we find the right species of mushroom, and also within species there are strains, which are very similar to how within tomatoes we have lots of different types of tomatoes. Those tomatoes ripen at different times. They might get to a different size. They might be different shapes or colors. So within many of the mushroom species, there's strains that offer different qualities, whether that's aesthetic or actually something that might be appropriate for your growing condition. So for instance, there's blue oyster mushrooms, which the oysters that are blues tend to like, in general, cooler temperatures, versus pink oyster, which likes really warm temperatures. And so depending on your environment where you're growing, you might want to choose a strain that's going to better match your conditions. We take those species and we feed them the right foods. And so all these mushrooms that we're growing are decomposing mushrooms. They basically eat organic matter as an energy source. And we call that material substrates. So we inoculate these substrates and we bring them together, and then we provide the conditions for them to grow. And what is actually growing is not a mushroom initially, but it's mycelium. Mycelium is the organism itself. It is the vegetative material that is the fungus. The mushroom is merely just one stage in the life cycle. It is the fruit, is the end of that life cycle. Although mycelium can, generally speaking, regenerate and fruit often multiple times before it's actually done. So what we really do is, as growers, is we support the mycelium to grow. What that really means is providing optimal temperatures and protecting it from potential contaminations. And then once the mycelium has grown through whatever material we're growing it through, whether that's a bag of straw or sawdust or a log, we're providing the conditions for those mushrooms to fruit successfully and to maintain quality, because at the end of the day, if we're going to be selling these, we really need to keep the quality at a premium. And so in an indoor setting, what that looks like is we're monitoring and controlling temperature, humidity, light, and fresh air exchange in whatever space we might be growing. Now, if we grow outside, of course, one of the advantages is that the forest or a shaded area can often provide many of these sort of conditions without having to add extra energy or put the infrastructure in it. So that's sort of the pros and cons. And if you go back to previous webinars, I talk a bit more about some of the pros and cons of indoor versus outdoor growing. But today what we're going to focus on is really hearing from both myself a bit and Yolanda about some of the sort of food safety and regulatory considerations for selling mushrooms. All right. Again, previous webinars, other webinars, we talk about how to grow them. There's all these different aspects, but we want to bring to the forefront now some of the conversation around, if I get into the selling of these, what does that look like? So I'll speak to that from the farm perspective, and then Yolanda's going to speak from sort of the larger regulatory picture that we find ourselves in if we're selling food to the general public. So generally speaking, in New York State, and I'll extend that to most other states, I really haven't come across any states that are requiring some kind of licensing to sell, generally speaking, like a produce item. So fresh mushrooms are considered a produce item, and generally produce items are not a regulated item, meaning you don't actually have to have a specific license or certification in order to sell fresh food as a produce item to a consumer. So generally speaking, again, in New York, I'll be really specific, but we find that as long as the produce is clean and it's in a clean container, then you can actually start selling that. And so this is where someone can start selling out of a pickup truck or a roadside stand, and then they could grow to a much larger operation if they so choose. Once you start to dry, process, cut, otherwise manipulate the fresh produce item, that's usually in most states when regulations start to kick in. And so that's a really key thing. Across the board, I think what's most important for specialty mushroom production is maintaining the highest possible quality of the mushrooms that you're producing. And one of the reasons for this is that we're asking often, as specialty mushrooms growers and as smaller growers, we're often asking for a premium. And that premium price is only going to be honored or valued by whoever you're selling to if the quality is really phenomenal. So I've personally had experience and heard from many growers that, you know, we take our mushrooms to chefs, or you have them at farmers market, and people say, wow, I've never seen shiitakes looking like this. They're so fresh. Like, you look at these ones on the left, freshly harvested from logs, versus the ones in the grocery store that, you know, very well could be of, you know, sitting on a refrigerated truck for months, you know, making this very long journey and looking a little disheveled, frankly, sometimes when they end up in the store. So you can really get that premium price, but only if you maintain that quality. And that's something that we've experienced and that we hear from growers consistently. With oyster mushrooms, the fact that you can grow a single cluster and actually provide that is actually your niche. It's your competitive advantage as a small producer, because the larger producers have a harder time maintaining that quality when they start to pack all those clusters of oysters in a box and ship it across the country or across the state. So quality is really important, and related to quality is really sanitation and safety. So when we think about this on the farm, what's really key with mushrooms is that you don't wash them. You actually can't wash them, because if you were to submerge them in water, you end up saturating them, and that can really damage the quality of them. So generally speaking, what's really important then is to make sure that from the point of harvest, whether they're indoors or out, to the point of sales, they need to be maintained in a very clean state. So it's very different than a carrot. I might be pulling that out of the ground. I can send it through a wash station. With mushrooms, we're going to really think even more hard about how we handle these mushrooms. So making sure that if I have livestock on my farm, that I'm not going to handle the livestock and then going immediately to harvest mushrooms, right? I'm going to wash my hands. If I've done something really dirty, I'm going to change my clothes. Often folks are wearing gloves when they're harvesting, just to make sure that they're absolutely clean when they're touching and handling this product. That's not necessarily a requirement, depending on different levels of programs you might be involved with, but cleanliness is absolutely essential as you go through. Thinking about the types of containers that we're harvesting into, and that those are stainless steel or at least food grade plastics that you're going to be handling and holding and storing those mushrooms in. Generally with mushrooms, I like to harvest with scissors instead of a knife, and this is mostly because of safety. If you're trying to kind of efficiently harvest, sometimes you with a knife can cut yourself, and so that's obviously going to slow you down and also cause a potential food contamination issue. So we like to use on our farm scissors very often. Sometimes with the oysters, it's a little hard to use scissors, and you do have to use a knife, but be careful as you go and recognize the danger inherent in that. And then, of course, everything needs to be routinely cleaned, stored in a clean location. We're not sticking these bins outside. We're keeping them in some place that's clean, and relatively speaking. So, a produce wash station is the type of thing we need. You don't have to have a certified kitchen, again, to handle fresh produce, but, we want to have a clean space that we're actually processing our food in. Alongside quality is also the time that we harvest. And so it's really important as you work with different mushroom species to understand, when are they ripe, when are they underripe, and when are they overripe. And I get plenty of pictures from really great new growers who send me these beautiful shiitakes. And the only problem is they're what I call the pancake shiitake. And you can see that picture on the bottom right. That's a bit overdone. And in some cases, if you're just eating that yourself, it's perfectly fine. Mushrooms are safe to eat, provided they're the species you're cultivating at all stages of their growth. But at that flat stage, what happens is that mushroom does not hold its quality very long. So the mushrooms on the bottom right, if I'm going to take them right inside and eat them, they're going to be fine. But if I stick them in the fridge 2 or 3 days later, the gills are probably yellow or brown. The cap and the edges may have kind of broken apart. If I put 5 pounds of those in a bag and I sell them to a restaurant, well, they open those up a few days later and they might really look pretty disheveled. So it's really important to notice that the timing is key. And it's not about the size of the mushroom, because the size can really depend on the environmental characteristics. It's really about how curled the cap is. So for all the mushrooms that have cap and stem, which is most of the ones that we're talking about growing, and the picture here is shiitake, but it's the same for oyster, you really want to have that edge curled under so that it's still kind of robust and can handle a bit of handling as it goes through the process. So those mushrooms on the top left really will be able to be handled for quite some time, potentially a week or more. And then finally, cleaning and grading is a really important aspect of it. So we've talked about safe harvesting, safe handling, thinking about the timing of our mushrooms, and then we're going to be cleaning them. And what we really use is not water again. We use brushes. We're basically just cleaning off the debris and preparing these for sale. And these are actually official mushroom brushes. But on our farm, and I know on many other farms, a simple set of paint brushes that are devoted just to mushroom production are perfectly fine. So when we think about grading, what we're really looking for is on our farm and again many others, the mushrooms are all harvested at once, and then as you're packing them for different markets, you're grading them out. And so we really want to think about, again, quality. I don't want to send someone who's paying top dollar, a mixed bag of some really beautiful ones and some really rough looking ones. As a grower, over time, you can refine your understanding and your technique and your timing so that the majority of your mushrooms are like what we would call grade A. But at the start, and depending on the weather and things like other variables, you might have some variability in quality. So just some examples here. Here's some A grade mushrooms. Really nice, clean, no defects, no damage, curled under, going to last really long. Here's maybe some B grade mushrooms where we have a little bit of damage, perfectly fine, beautiful specimens, much better than what can be often found out there on the market, but a little lower in quality. I would still sell those to most of my outlets. And then our C grades, these are again outdoor production, so these have some slug damage, some bug damage. So these might be for some select customers for a discount. We might be dehydrating these. We might be eating some of these ourselves because they're just not appropriate to sell to market. So there is no standard. There is no specific grading process to follow, but it is something to keep in mind as you go. Great. And what I want to mention at this point is just a guide that we're about to publish. We're just waiting on some finalization that's going to offer some more detail in these categories that I've talked about, as well as some of the things Yolanda is going to talk about next. It's called From Harvest to Market. It's a downloadable PDF that should be up on our website this month. We're really excited to release it. You being on this list, if you're on the list, you'll get a notification of that. So that'll be something you can download. It's a companion to the shiitake best management guide that we have on our website that talks all about log-grown shiitake and all the results of our research there. And we're now developing an indoor production guide that'll be the sort of third partner in this series of booklets. So we're really looking forward to sharing this. This booklet focuses on everything post-harvest. So while the other two booklets are going to talk about all the considerations as you're growing, this booklet really focuses on no matter where you grow your mushrooms, what you do once you harvest them, to both make sure your product quality is high and also to make sure that it's safe and adhering to the regulations that are required out there in the world. And so with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Yolanda, who's going to pick up and talk a little bit more about the regulatory climate when we talk about food safety and mushrooms.
Sure. If you can stop sharing, I'll share my screen. Okay, great. Just pulling up the PowerPoint. Okay. So can everyone see that okay? Steve, you can see that?
Sorry, I was muted. It looks great.
Oh, okay, great. All right. All right. Oops. Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Yolanda Gonzalez, and I'm an urban ag specialist for Cornell Cooperative Extension, based in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And so, I just wanted to take some time to talk about the food safety aspects of mushroom production. So, for those who aren't familiar, GAP stands for Good Agricultural Practices, and it's a voluntary audit. Basically, it's a buyer imposed program. So let's say you have a retailer or a distributor that is requiring food safety certification. It'll usually be in the form of GAP certification. And this website, gaps.cornell.edu, has all upcoming trainings. There's one happening in Warrensburg in mid-July if you're interested in checking that out. I planned on sharing my screen afterwards to show you the website. So the main components of GAP certification are that you need to have a food safety plan. And so in this plan, you'll identify and document potential hazards, hazard control measures, as well as keep record keeping for your water quality. So making sure that if you are using water, that it is safe, basically adequate as drinking water. And that you're also documenting that your employees have been properly trained in good health and hygiene practices. Everyone knows where the hand washing facilities are. They have access to a toilet. And in this plan, you'll also include record keeping for pest control, traceability, and so on and so forth. And FISMA, for those who aren't familiar, stands for Food Safety Modernization Act. And this is not a voluntary audit as opposed to GAP certification. This is a federally mandated inspection. So the main difference between GAP certification and FISMA is that GAP is a buyer imposed voluntary audit, and then FISMA is a federally mandated inspection. So you'll have inspectors come to your farm as opposed to auditors. And this is the compliance dates for those inspections. So basically, the bigger your farm, the sooner you'll have to be in compliance with FISMA. If you make under $25,000, you are excluded from the produce safety law, produce safety rule, actually. The produce safety rule is under FISMA. So when I say produce safety rule, it's just one of the types of rules under the Food Safety Modernization Act. And if you do make, there is an exemption. So you can be qualified exempt from the rule if for 3 running years you have an average gross revenue of less than $500,000 in all food sales, and that you sell the majority of the food to qualified end users. So that means either direct consumers or retail locations within 275 miles of the primary address of the farm. Oops. Okay, I just got a question. It says, water quality, at what point in the process a forcing soak for a maintenance storage? Right, okay, so in terms of agriculture, so it would be agricultural water. So whatever water that you are using, it would have to, so let's say you're using a pond or a nearby lake or something like that. You would just have to make sure that you're keeping track of the water tests that you're doing for that surface water. So making sure that, I'll point you to where that website is. I'll get to it in a little bit. I just had a question about water quality. Yeah, so qualified exempt. Again, if you make less than 500,000 and if you sell the majority of your food to qualified end users, then you could be categorized as qualified exempt from FISMA. And so let's say you are taking fresh mushrooms and you're processing it in some way. Let's say you're drying them, or let's say you're gonna preserve them in some other fashion, or you're gonna freeze them or whatever. Any of that, any modification to a fresh product, that would be considered processing, and you would need a processing license, a New York State processing license. And that is managed through the Department of Agriculture and Markets, and that's called Article 20C license. What's important about this is that you really only apply for a 20C license when you're ready for sales, but you haven't sold anything yet. It's also just good to know that sometimes this process gets held up because you have to wait for an inspector to come out to the facility that you'll be processing, so that could take a few months, so you want to plan in advance. And also keep in mind that you don't apply for a 20C license until you know where you'll be processing the mushrooms. So because the license is attached to the facility where you'll be processing, the inspector has to come, inspect the overall facility, see how you handle the fresh product. So your license is attached to the location where you'll be processing. So some producers, they have one kitchen, but let's say they visit a second kitchen to do a portion of their processing. Then they would need an additional license for that other kitchen. So just be mindful that it's tied to where you'll be producing. And medicinal products, so according to the FDA, the law defines dietary supplements in part as any products taken by mouth that contain a dietary ingredient. There's more information about cautionary language that should be used. In general, you don't want to make any medical claims saying that this product will cure this illness or disease, or for the medical treatment of X. Just making sure that you're being careful about the claims about the health claims that you're making of your medicinal product. So that's really the main component there. And in terms of when you're considered a farm, it's when you start selling or intend to sell any amount of crops or livestock. So according to the USDA, that's $1,000 or more in income, and you would register as a DBA or an LLC with farm name, and also file a Schedule F with the IRS and register with the Farm Service Agency. That's optional. And some of the benefits is that you can write off farm expenses on taxes. You don't pay sales tax on purchases for your farm. You become eligible for farm payment programs, so the USDA. You also benefit from the ag assessment once you gross 10,000 or more a year. And there's more information on the Cornell Small Farms Program if you did have a question about becoming a small-scale processor and the 20C license, as well as the steps for registering your farm as well. And that's all I have. I just wanted to share my screen for a second because I wanted to show where you can find more information for the grower training course. So I'm just gonna switch screens for a second. So like I mentioned on the gaps.cornell.edu website, if you go on the left hand under in-person GAPS trainings, the next one coming up, like I mentioned, is on July 15th in Warrensburg. So that's quite a ways up from New York City at least. But if you're able to make it, cost is around $35, and there is no day two of, usually you'll have day one where it's all the modules, and then day two you'll write your food safety plan. This one's just a one-day event, so just keep that in mind. There is additional information here, so if you didn't want to do an in-person training, you could also do an online course. kind of gives you a broad overview of all the different steps and all the different components of GAP certification. And then if you just Google GAP, mushroom GAP certification, usually the USDA website pops up. So in this website, under mushroom good agricultural practices, you'll find additional information for industry-wide food safety standards, and you'll want to look at that as to what the USDA factors as important in terms of food safety for mushroom production. And so that has a list of all the different things that you'll need to include in your food safety plan and just keep in mind. So, and as well as an audit checklist. So when the auditor comes, they'll be using this checklist to make sure that you're complying with all the different practices that you need to comply for in terms of receiving that GAP certification. That's all I have. That was the main. I'm going to open this up. So this is what the checklist looks like. It's fairly straightforward, but I think the most important thing for GAP certification is really the food safety plan. And yeah, there's a lot of information on the GAP's website about how to go about starting that. And a training is really the first step that I recommend folks to go to, so that they can get a broad overview of kind of like what you need to include in the plan. So that's all I have. I'll see if anybody has any questions.